For the next 10 minutes or so, we're going to be looking at what's going on in this picture and why this wedding feast has been interrupted in Luca Giordano's highly original and dramatic take on a classical tale, Perseus turning Phineus and his followers into stone. Luca Giordano was born in Naples. He actually trained with a Spanish painter because at the time, in the 17th century, Naples was actually under Spanish rule. But despite being Neapolitan, he actually traveled throughout Italy and had a very long career. He died in his 70s, and Giordano traveled to Rome, to Florence, to Venice, and even for about a decade towards the end of his life to Spain, where he worked for the king there, Charles III. Now, Giordano was particularly adept at painting on a huge scale, as you can see from the picture behind me, but countless altarpieces and frescoes. He was also well known for painting very, very quickly, so much so that it earned him the nickname fa presto, which means in Italian literally, does it quickly. In this picture, Giordano tackles the story of Perseus, the Greek hero, turning Phineus and his followers into stone. It's a story that's told by the Roman poet Ovid in his book The Metamorphoses, which means literally transformations. It's a collection of short stories that tell of tales between the gods and mortals and transformations. And it was widely read by artists and poets and used from the Renaissance onwards. Now here we see Perseus dressed in blue. He has just saved the young, beautiful princess Andromeda from a sea monster. And he's been promised her hand in marriage in return. And what we see here is their wedding feast, which has been brutally interrupted by Phineus, who was formerly betrothed to Andromeda. He has stormed in on this wedding feast with 1,000 followers, and Perseus, seeing that he is outnumbered, knows he cannot fight these figures alone. So what he's done is he's pulled out the head of the Gorgon Medusa, whom he has just slain. Now, Medusa was known for turning people to stone. Anyone who looked into her eyes would be turned instantly to stone. And as you can see, Perseus is holding up her head and actually turning away from the head of the Medusa and actually facing her towards these three warriors over here. And what Giordano is showing us is the actual act of transformation. These figures are literally turning into stone as we watch. Now, the man at the far left is almost certainly Phineus, the former fiancé of Andromeda. And I say that because he has the most elaborate helmet and quite a beautiful breastplate. And then next to him, he has two of his 1,000 followers. Now, Phineus is in a very kind of strong, active, and sort of striding pose. It's what we call a contrapposto pose, where one arm is forward and the equivalent leg is back, and the opposite happens on the other direction. And it gives an enormous amount of dynamism to this figure. He's really in movement here, but he's actually rooted to the spot, and his face is sort of fixed in a sort of petrified scream, literally petrified, literally turning to stone. Because the upper part of his body is grey, he's already turned to stone, but you can just see on his thigh there's still a hint of that pinkish flesh, which shows even his toes are still very much pink and alive, but he is gradually turning into a statue. Now, the man to the right, in the center, seen in profile, is completely in stone, but that's probably because he's the figure closest to the head of the Medusa. And the man between them that we see from behind, his upper body is twisted and fixed into, a sort of statuesque pose, but his legs are very much still alive. Now, what I find fascinating about these three figures is that they're very much conceived like statues. You see that they're very much rooted to the spot. And what Giordano does is he contrasts that with Perseus. Perseus is full of movement. He's striding forward and he turns away, and his waves of his hair sort of flying in the wind, the plumes in his hat, his drapery is billowing behind him and fluttering. And you get a real sense of movement, which of course contrasts with what's happening on the left. Now, Giordano adopted a very witty conceit in this picture, because what he's doing with these three men shown in very different poses, one seen from the front, one seen from behind, one in profile, and if you look closely here, there's even a figure seen from below who's really sharply foreshortened. And what he's doing here is referencing a famous debate of the time. It was known as the paragone, which in Italian means comparison. And it's the paragone, the debate that really questions whether painting or sculpture was better at presenting a kind of lifelike figures. And here, of course, he's arguing for the supremacy of painting. Although this is a two-dimensional object, he can show a figure in the round, from the front, from behind, from the side, and that's what he's trying to show here. Now, another witty thing that Giordano has done is that he's based two of the warriors on real sculptures, very famous classical sculptures. The one on the left, Phineas, is actually based on the Borghese gladiator. Now, this is a figure that was actually excavated in the early 17th century in Rome. It's today in the Musée du Louvre in Paris. And that classical sculpture has exactly the same pose. And although the front part of the arm has actually fallen off, you can see there's still a strap where he used to hold a shield. And Giordano has even included that in this picture here. Now, the man seen from behind is taken from an incredibly famous group of figures called the Laocoon, which today is in the Vatican. And this, in the 17th century, was an incredibly famous group of sculpture. Even Rubens copied it. Many, many artists went to see it when they visited Rome. But what's unusual is we see it from behind, because, in fact, in Giordano's day, this sculpture was shown in a niche, so you wouldn't have been able to stand and walk around it. And he may have seen engravings, or Giordano may have actually seen the sculpture in the flesh, because he was in Rome in the 1680s when this picture was painted. Now, we don't know who commissioned this picture. We don't know where it was for. But judging from its scale, one can imagine it was for a very wealthy private patron. It was meant to hang in a large palazzo, certainly. And it had as its pendants, as its companions, two other pictures, also by Giordano. And we have to think that 17th century audiences, so the patron for whom this picture was painted, but also his erudite circle of friends, would have instantly recognized the story depicted here, and would also have immediately recognized that these two figures were based on these very famous sculptures. In the early 18th century, this picture actually hung in a palazzo in Genoa, in the Balbi collection. And in the same collection was displayed Rubens's famous landscape with Het Steen, also now in the National Gallery. Now today, that picture by Rubens is far more well known than this one by Giordano. But in the early 18th century, this picture was valued much more than that. It shows it was much more highly prized, which is very surprising to us today. This picture was the first major painting by Luca Giordano to enter the National Gallery's collection in 1983. And in 2012, it was reframed with this magnificent 17th century Florentine frame. And today, this picture hangs at the very heart of the newly refurbished Julia and Hans Rausing room, where the real highlights of the Italian Baroque collection hang. And it's here that Luca Giordano, quite rightly, takes his place alongside Caravaggio, Guido Reni, Orazio Gentileschi, and the other great painters of the Italian 17th century. If you're interested in learning more about art history, you can click here or here. Thank you very much for watching, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.